Welcome to Institute of Politics YouTube channel. My name is James and I'll be the host on this channel. We're going to discuss here political trends, political analysis, and just worldwide events. Today with me, Ruslan Bortnik, political scientist, expert, and the director of Ukrainian Institute of Politics. Thanks for joining me today.
It was pleasure. It is pleasure for me. Thank you, James.
Thank you. I want to talk today about the history of the relationships between Russia and Ukraine. Maybe we can start from the very beginning when the USSR fall apart. What were the relationships then? How did they start? If they were friendly, warm, or the way that the USSR disconnected to multiple regions have set the first stone for potential future conflicts?
How this conflict grew up in the atmosphere in the eastern of Europe it's very difficult question because there are a lot of politicizing of this question from different sources, because if you are trying to analyze the reasons of the conflict, so you are trying to advise to explain what is going on and what will happen in the future. And so there are a lot of conflicts. On this topic, what were the main reasons which led both countries to this armed conflict, to this full-scale war for nowadays? But at the beginning, we need to remember that Ukraine was a permanent part of the Soviet Union at the same time. Many Ukrainian communistic leaders were in head of Soviet Union, and there was even a joke in Russia that Russia was occupied by Ukrainian communists, because a lot of Ukrainians were very successful in Soviet Union and were in the head of that state. And when the divorce between Soviet republics happened in December 1991, it was also a divorce process between elites. And all that elites, Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, and other countries, were communistic elites. First two presidents of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma and Leonid Kravchuk, they were communistic leaders, especially.
They were members of the Communist Party.
They were heads of communistic party, especially Kravchuk, but Kuchma also. And also Yeltsin, the first president of Russia, he was also head of Russian Communistic Party, of a Communistic Party of Russian Republic inside of Soviet Union. So if we are talking about the ideology stage, they were very close, very close. It was communistic post-Soviet leaders who was trying to divide the huge Soviet Union into the small or big national republic. And at the beginning, the first 5-10 years, maybe even, there were not big conflicts between these republics, between these elites, because they were very relative. But there were a lot of conflicts inside of these republics, ethnical, religious conflicts, and so on. Chechnya, Pridnestrovye, Abkhazia, radical religious leaders in Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and so on. A lot of conflicts.
You mean that the separation went very friendly, and the emergence of new countries were quiet and peaceful, if we can say so. But inside new countries that emerge out of the USSR separation, they had more internal conflicts inside those new countries or republics.
Yeah, exactly. It happened. It happened because most of these countries were new-made countries. Almost all of them never in their history obtained their territories. Soviet Union compared, combined, and created these republics. Of course, they have historical background, but not in this in all amount of all entire nowadays their territories, and they have no strong political tradition.
Yeah, so they
This,
haven't had a modern system to manage their country.
yeah, they looked more like states in the United States, but not like a fully
An
independent
independent
countries.
country.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
absolutely. And then elites in these separated republics have a very difficult choose which strategic way for development they have to take. Uh, Go to West, go to China, make a liberal model or ethnical national model of
Or
state
stay
owned,
neutral.
or stay neutral, for example, like Turkmenistan, a lot of models. And it was very hard time of choosing these models, colored revolutions, very often changing of regimes in these countries. Russia was also very, very weak. Russia was not able even to resolve the conflict in the Caucasus, in Chechnya, and only after Putin came to his position, and Putin, who was generated by the internal forces of Russia, Russian deep state, special investigation services, and so on. Only after this period, the Russia became more stable, and Russia started to make a push to the other Soviet republics. Part of them choose the way to collaborate with Russia, like Asian Soviet republics. Few of them, like example Belarus, has chosen to go inside of Russia to become a deeper cooperation, to become maybe a one state. Some of them choose Western way, Baltic countries at the beginning, and then later Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and so on. Also, the different internal models of governance in these countries also was fulfilled. For example, if you are trying to go to West, you need to separate from Russia. If you need to separate from Russia, you need to make national, even sometimes nationalistic model against Russia to make this division line inside of this old Soviet body, which is very difficult because everything is connected inside. Everything were connected inside of Soviet Union. Economy, relatives, for example, near 4 million Ukrainians have relatives in Russia still. Everything was connected. And so it was very, very difficult uh,
To
sometimes
separate.
to separate, yes, to separate, to divide these parts of old Soviet body to make from that parts fully uh, fully made, good function modern states. It's very difficult, and no one state still, no one state from post-Soviet state is successful in this. Even for only for my opinion, even if we are talking about the Baltic states, um, I can say that they are very successful. I can say that these countries are flourishing now in the West. They have a lot of problems. They are very dependent. They are still unsafe in this world. But if we are talking about Ukraine, Ukraine has also a short time during the Kuchma's time, maybe 5, 10 years, when we was trying to balance between West and East. Ukraine announced the neutral model, non-bloc model. Ukraine announced willingness to cooperate with the West and East, and Ukraine was the country of balanced international interest. What does it mean? It means that
between
Russia,
the East and West.
we were East and West. For example, Russia invested a lot of money in Ukraine, in bank sector, in energy sector. I am talking about hundreds
$1 billion.
billion dollars. And from another side, Western countries invested a lot of in Ukraine, in bank sector, in agricultural sector, and other sectors. And we was the country with balanced interest. When the West and East meeting together, competing together, cooperating together, and making something new in Ukrainian territory.
And I think we can call that time probably the most successful and flourishing time for Ukraine.
Yeah, from the economical side, of course, because we have the
just from the financial perspective.
Yeah. We have almost 13% of GDP growth in that per year for that time. And I think the general strategic reason of this war, this conflict, is changing this balance.
Just before we jump into the war, you touched a very interesting topic when Ukraine had its financial growth and when it was balancing between the West and the East. During the 2014 or 13, when the Euromaidan started, it's because at that time the president have denied or decided not to go with the proposition to sign a trade agreement with European countries. And it's interesting that you're saying before even they talked about that agreement, you're saying that Ukraine had a very successful trade relationships with the West. And we'll touch it a little bit later, but I just want to point that when they did sign that agreement, that trade agreement with European countries, in terms of percentage, the GDP or the nominal export and import between Ukraine and the West, it didn't go up. It actually either went down or remained the same. So it's an interesting point that one of the reasons why Euromaidan started wasn't actually at the end of the day successful, because even after signing that agreement, the trade haven't went up, or that potentially happened because of the escalation that started with Russia after they have decided to take a more Western orientation.
I think this story is not a reason; it's just a causing of the problem. Because I want Ukraine to become a member of European Union, and I wanted it before. But to be honest, that agreement which European Union proposed for Ukraine in 2013,
2012 or 2013.
Yeah, it was unhonest agreement, because Ukraine, due that agreement, Ukraine had to open our market, and the European Union hadn't such demands, such duties from Ukraine to Ukraine. So it was only one-way road. And if we are taking into account the researches of our national official Institute of Economical Investigation in Ukraine, they called that Ukraine can lose near $100 billion.
So they knew that's not a fair trade agreement between Ukraine and European Union.
It was not fair agreement.
For Ukraine, specifically. For Ukraine. It was potentially good for...
And to be honest, the history showed for us it very clearly, because...
That it wasn't at the end.
Because, yes, during we have 10 years, which now happened from the time, and we can say honestly that because that agreement, Ukraine lost a lot of branches of our economy. And only now, in the beginning of the war, when the European Union really and honestly opened for us
its border,
their market,
yeah.
we took the chance to earn good money for their market. Not before the war. Between 2014 and 2022, that agreement played only for European hands, not in very small. There were only small privileges for Ukraine, not enough for such a big economy. It was a reason why Ukraine was losing the people, why Ukrainian economical level was very low, but even that situation. So it was not very honest. But I think the situation of Euromaidan and signing or not signing that agreement was only the cause to attack the Yanukovych.
Because so those are not connected situations; they're separate.
It's connected situation, but Ukrainian opposition just used the situation.
Just used it as one of their tools
to dismiss the Yanukovych, and the Ukrainian opposition just used European and American elites like a tool for dismissing Yanukovych in that situation. Now situation is balancing, but very slow and balancing because of war, because Europe opened for us their market, and now we are trying to achieve more privileges, more benefits from that market.
But at the same time, they're pushing back. They're protesting against the Ukrainian export. They're trying to block the borders, specifically in Poland.
We have still a lot of conflicts, and of course, all these nowadays privileges of Ukraine are still topics of negotiation between Ukraine and the European Union, and they are still a reason why many European countries are not ready to accept Ukraine like a member.
Ukraine into European Union. Before they start all these trade agreements. That makes sense.
We have too much resources. And then I want to add to this opinion, because it's very important. After 2014, this balance between West and East in Ukraine was dramatically changed. Russia lost fast.
Ideologically.
No, not ideologically. I will say
financially.
Financially, Russia lost her billions of money in Ukraine because Russian bank investment were blocked.
Investments.
Russian investments in energy sector were blocked. Companies were ruined in Ukraine, and so on and so on. And of course, when we are talking about the ideological side, about the language, Russian language, about the church religion topic, and so on, about the even security reasons from Russian side, they are reasons, but it's only additional reasons. It's a reasons to explain the society or explain countries why Russia made this illegal intervention to Ukraine. But the real reason is money. The real reason, for my opinion, the real reason is that Russia lost a lot of money, a huge amount of money in Ukraine. And Russia was not able to make a new agreement with the West about saving Russian money in Ukraine. If this changing of this balance is the main reason for my opinion, of the war.
Before we move forward, I think we established that in 2013-14, when there were like negotiations between the West and the East, and that Ukraine have decided to move with more Western agreements. Before we move forward, we can say that that phase potentially was the break point where the balance was lost between the East and the West. And we can say that when the balance was lost, the major victim, if we can say so, to that loss was Ukraine itself, because before it was earning from the Western side and from the Eastern side.
From geopolitical side, exactly.
From geopolitical, yeah. But before we move forward, can we say that up until 2013 and 14, Ukraine was balancing well between the Western and the Eastern interests inside the country, or were there any signs before 2013 of a potential future conflict from the Russian perspective? What I mean by that, that obviously we can say that it's all about the money, it's all about the trade, but were there any ideological perspective or cases where Russians have started already then or before so to plan potentially invade or financially take control over Ukraine? I'm asking that question just because, that situation in 2013-14, obviously we can say that the balance was broken and what happened next happened, but I just don't believe that in a month or 6 months or a year, you can plan strategically a potential annexation of Crimea without a prep plan strategically before so, if you know what I mean.
I know what do you mean. It's very popular now, especially in the West, to talk about the long time preparation for annexation for this attack for Ukraine, but I don't think so. I'm thinking, as I see it from inside of Ukraine, almost all Russia, almost all on Ukrainian topic, Russia was done on a reactive way,
spontaneously,
instinctive way, and of course, Ukraine was not very successful in that balance in West and East. Ukraine was very corrupted, not good managed, and not United States all that time. Ukraine was very vulnerable and non-stable state all this time. And of course, before even 2014, we had a lot of conflicts with Russia. We had a lot of trade conflicts, even in Yanukovych time. Even for example, very popular on Ukrainian agricultural production, on Russian gas and oil in Ukraine, and so on, so on. We have also a territorial conflict. Maybe do you remember the Kuchma, Crimea, Tuzla, island Tuzla? We had a lot of very hard ideological discussion, because many of Russian people, many of Russian intellectuals said that Ukraine is just a imaginary state. It's not real state. There is no Ukrainians. There is no political history for such a state. You're just a part of Russian people and so on. But we had a lot of such discussion. And of course, these discussions, these conflicts, they prepared the public opinion from both sides to this conflict, because more and more people started to accept each other like a potential enemy. More and more. Very important role in this situation also played Ukrainian immigrational group and radical Western group in Ukraine and Russian radical group. They are trying to cut, to divide, to make the influence of different part of Ukrainian society. Ukraine was also, if you are talking about the entire Ukrainian society, they were very different. More than 30% of Ukrainian population were people who belonged to the national minorities, to the language minorities. Ukraine was very divided on the people who were living in the cities. It was very cosmopolitan, modern thinking, technical thinking people, and people who were living in the villages of Ukraine. They were more traditional, more ethnical thinking, and so on. A lot of division line in all these lands, which were compared only in 1945 in entire state after the Second World War, were in Ukraine. And of course, many politicians inside of Ukraine, many politicians outside of Ukraine were trying to use these lines for their political goals.
They have decided to divide and control and use all the internal conflicts.
Old Rome rule.
Now, if we go back to the Euromaidan, what role do you think it played in Russian-Ukrainian relationships and Ukrainian-European relationships?
At the beginning, after the ending, after the success of Euromaidan, Russia partly lost her political influence in Ukraine. But at the same time, Russia obtained Crimea and partly Donbass. Russia used situation of Euromaidan for annexation of Crimea because Russia
to justify their actions.
Yeah, because Russia said you broke up the legal president, so you don't have any legal authority in your country. So we are annexing, we are saving, defending, and then annexing of Crimea. And then when the Russia understood that the world in Ukraine will not accept this annexation, Russia started the operation in Donbass, or helped the Donbass separatists to start the armed fights against Ukraine. But at the same time, to be honest, in this situation, we need to say that the half of Ukrainian society hadn't accepted the Euromaidan. The last sociology research surveys last month of Euromaidan in the January in 2014 showed us that half of Ukrainian society hadn't support Euromaidan. And so
the nation was divided politically into two main categories.
So there was entire reasons of this for this separatistic or anti-authoritarian, anti-governmental movement in Ukraine. And Russia claimed and used all these lines, all these divisions for her own way. Then during 2014-2022, step by step, Russia lost her investigation in Ukraine, and Russia lost her last political influence. I'm talking about political channels, political parties which were oriented to cooperation with Russia. And then in 2022, in the beginning of 2022, a few months before the war, Russia lost everything in Ukraine. Any instruments of influence, of possible influence of Ukraine were lost from Russian sides. This changing of this balance ended. This story of changing this balance ended. I am not going very important thing. I'm not going to justify Russia, because in any case, Russia has made an absolutely illegal criminal intervention in Ukraine. But I only want to explain how, from political side, this situation was changing in Ukraine.
Yeah, like what was the foundation that made them take that illegal and violent step? But before we get to 2022, I want to focus a little bit on that part between 2014 to 2022. How would you describe during these years how the relationship, I can't say developed, but how they were maintaining the relationship between Russia and Ukraine? Was that just a step to the further escalation in 2022? Or we can say that it was still not set in stone that war will get into a higher scale invasion from the Russian side to Ukraine? What were the cases where we could have seen a potential peaceful resolution? And if there are any situations that could have signaled to Ukrainians and to the West that this is just a step or just a warm-up preparation for a higher scale war?
I think we are not very wisdom in this situation. We are not very clever in this situation. And we do many things with Russia, we do very sharply. Of course, we have our own rule to make our independent state, to do everything, to go to lead this state to anywhere we want and when we can. But sometimes it looks like we are not wise, very wise in this situation, clever. We could be more polite and diplomatic in many cases.
Could Ukrainians do something to prevent the war during these years?
For example, I think we could. For example, I think Ukrainian decision to don't fulfill the Minsk agreement, for example, was a mistake because
Why haven't they done it?
Because our politicians wanted to play a very heroic role in face of Ukrainian society. They, as I remember, Ukrainian president thought that all Russian dangerous was just a blackmailing of Ukraine, just nothing awards and so on. And sometimes we behave like a person in zoo, which is entering to the lion's
Inside the
guard.
cage, yeah.
Yeah, and of course, lion will bite this person because lion is just lion. And in Russia like such a geopolitical animal, like a big many other geopolitical states. And so we were not very polite. We were not wise in this situation. And I think we had a lot of instruments to prevent this war. This war shouldn't happen from the rational side of thinking. This war is a result of many political mistakes and very selfish and foolish political behavior.
It's interesting that you've mentioned that the Russians were blackmailing Ukraine, and I'm assuming the West as well, because they were trying to negotiate something for themselves, and they were trying to, at the same time, show their muscles. Before we get into the full-scale invasion, I think a lot of people assumed in the West that Russians were blackmailing Ukraine and the West, and they either were ignorant or they have refused to believe that they can actually act and not just blackmail. At the same time, I want to touch a little bit, how did Ukrainian government a few months before or 6 months before the war, I think there was a lot of intelligent information from intelligence services that were saying that Russians indeed are prepping for a full-scale invasion. I remember at that time, the Russian government, they have either pretended or purposely, they were saying that nothing will happen. They would not start a war. They're just blackmailing, and we will remain as we are and keep pushing our interests without considering a potential, highly visible threat. Why have they behaved that way? And do you think that they have actually had an intelligent information from their own intelligence services agencies and from the West? Because I'm saying that from the perspective of all the lives that could have been saved if they were either prepped or evacuate people from the borderline.
I think you're right, especially when we are talking about the Mariupol or Bucha or many other places which could be evacuated, prepared for this intervention. You asked a very difficult question because I don't know, is it time to talk about this honesty? But I will try to answer this question. Our government tried to calm down all the military opinion, behaving feelings, dangerous feelings in Ukrainian society. Maybe because that if Ukrainian government recognized these dangers, it meant that Ukrainian government made political and geopolitical mistakes which lead Ukraine to the war.
So they would have to accept responsibility.
Yeah, yeah. And it's one answer. Other answer, maybe they were still thinking that it was really blackmailing, and but many
they could
of
have
them
honestly assumed that they were just blackmailing them.
They couldn't believe in it because Ukrainian government was extremely unexperienced and very young person who hadn't before any political experience, who hasn't read any good historical books, it looks like it. And maybe it's also a problem. And maybe the third answer, maybe the reason was they were thinking that West and Russia blackmailing them to pushing them to fulfill the Minsk agreement, which were declined, Minsk agreements which were declined in previous time by the president, his team, like as unacceptable agreement for Ukraine. And the third way, maybe they were trying to win the time. To win the time, they were preparing personally. Many of Ukraine representatives of Ukrainian government were preparing personally for this situation. They were selling realty, apartments, houses. They were moving money from Ukraine and so on. In any case, it's very difficult questions. And now, as I understand, in any case, I don't know how this our dialogue will finish, but I think the end of the war will cover everything. Only the winner of the war will write his own truth about this war.
Now we can move into the full-scale invasion. I think exact same way that Ukraine was not fully accepting that that invasion can happen or will happen. I think at the same time, Russians haven't had a very strategic, clear plan. What are they going to do with Ukraine and how they will act in terms of the military and their invasion? We can say so because their invasion have not been so successful at the early stages. Was that because they haven't planned it well, or because Ukrainian resisted strong and hard enough to prevent any potential plans that Russians had? How do you see it from your perspective, or it's a mixture of both?
It's a mixtures of many factors. At the beginning, Russia was not planning to annex or occupy Ukraine. The main Russian plan in the beginning of the war to change the government, to enter the Kyiv without any occupation, just through the roads, like United States in Iraq many years ago, and change the government and then go out from Ukraine. So they prepared for this operation. Special military operation.
That's why they called it a special military operation.
They prepared a very small amount of the troops for such a huge country. We had in 3 or even 5 times more troops in defense than they had in offensive operation. Then it was first months till the end of March. And I want to remind you that in the end of the March, in the beginning of the April, both sides, Ukraine and Russia, prepared so-called Istanbul Agreement.
Yeah.
So Russia, due to that agreement, Russia could achieve some main goals, not all, but some main goals of this offensive operation. When that agreement was broken because of influence of our partners from England and other countries, because of absence security guarantees for Ukraine and Ukrainian government from United States and Great Britain, which was honestly announced from Ukrainian side. Russia changed her plans for Ukraine.
There are strategic plans in Ukraine. But before we get to the next phase of war, specifically with those agreements, were the leaders of both countries, Zelensky and Putin, were they interested to sign those agreements, and would they sign it if West allies wouldn't intervene and prevent Ukraine from moving forward with that agreement?
Of course, I'm not sure. But I think if the Western countries, United States and Great Britain, would give Ukraine security guarantees and Ukrainian government security guarantees, because Zelensky needed a support for the next election after this agreement. Just imagine the situation. I think that agreement could be fulfilled, could be realized. But that no one or Ukrainian president will accept any agreement with Russia without security guarantees from the West, personal and for country also. So this key for this conflict, we have many keys for this conflict, but main key, the gold key, is buried somewhere in the Washington, maybe in London, and so on. And then after that the agreement was broken, Russia started a new strategy to Ukraine, a new way of occupation and annexation of Ukrainian territory. And if at the beginning, the first goal was to change the government, not broken the country, but only to change the government. Now Russian goal is occupy as much as possible Ukrainian lands, make them part of Russia, and eliminate Ukrainian existence on that occupied territories. It's a total war. Of course, Russia understands that she has no such a power to achieve all the lands of Ukraine now, to occupy all the territory. But she demonstrates that she is ready to do it for a long time.
They're demonstrating a will.
Yeah, biting part by part.
How far do you think they can get? How far do you think they can get?
It depends on the level of the Western support of Ukraine. I'm talking about financial and military level. 300 billion United States dollars Western partners of Ukraine spent to Ukraine. 1/3 of that money is financial support and humanitarian support, and 2/3 of that money is military support. It's a huge money. But if of course we are comparing with Afghanistan, it's still not so huge money, but it's a huge money, and it depends on the ability of Ukraine to send Ukrainian men to the front, to elaborate together the soldiers. Because even if you have money, if you have a weapon, but if you don't have enough amount of soldiers, you will lose this war. I think Ukrainian ability to collect these soldiers and to send them to the fronts will not last than 1, maybe 2 years. And then Western partners of Ukraine will take a crossroad of choosing the next scenario of development of this situation, to send to Ukraine their own troops or not to send, because without Western troops, Ukraine will not be able to continue this very exhausting, very attrition war.
The topic about the financial aid that Ukraine has received, I think it would be good for us to create a separate video to discuss what financial aid Ukraine has received what was donated and what was lent that Ukraine will have to pay back. But just to summarize this conversation, this is obviously a very complex conflict at this moment, and things, as you've mentioned before, are happening spontaneously, and Russia is changing its strategy as they go, and Ukraine has to maneuver and negotiate their moves with the Western allies.
But West also changed strategy to Ukraine, because in the beginning, nobody in the West believed that Ukraine is able to defend from Russian attack, full-scale attack. No one. So Ukraine, in the beginning of the war, Ukraine obtained only anti-aircraft, anti-air, anti-tank system, a hand system, not serious weapon. Then Western partners of Ukraine understood that Ukraine is able to
resist,
defeat Russia even in her own territory. And Ukraine obtained a lot of ammunition, a lot of weapon. But now it looks like we have a stuck in this conflict. We have
this is exactly my question.
Yeah, and we have a new balance, and which needs a new strategy for these conflicts, also from Western side.
So it looks very stuck from the Russian perspective. It looks very complex from the inside of Ukraine, and so as from the Western perspective. How do you think we can end this war? What should the Western countries and Ukrainian allies should do? And what should Ukraine itself decide, do, or plan? And how can they negotiate that to make Russians take part in that agreement to end this war?
We should be very patient in this situation. Russia is not also a very stable state, and Putin is very old. So I think in the next 20 years, Russia will change again. But which these changes will be, it's very dependent on the situation of Ukraine, and they very dependent from the negotiation, communication between West and East, between Russia and Western countries. Because after Putin to the power in Russia can come even more radical person.
More radical parties. If we talk solely from Ukrainian perspective, what is best for Ukraine right now? To freeze this conflict or keep resisting?
I'm trying to lead you to this answer between only simple answers. From the simple answers, the road to the hell combined, all good answers. They are very complicated answers, of course. From Ukrainian side, the peace is the main goal, because in any case, the war is going on in Ukrainian territory, and our territory, our economy, our people, our infrastructure, are destroying, killing.
Ukraine is taking most of the suffering.
Yeah, and we need to find a new balance. Maybe we need more sides for this balance than two. Not only Russia and West, but also China, global South countries, and so on. Maybe two different sides of West we should take to this situation. European Union and United States, their positions sometimes they are also different to Ukrainian conflict. We need to find new balance in security agreement between the West and East at the beginning, and then we need to find internal balance inside of Ukraine, maybe involving the Chinese, United States, and other countries' money. Money is the best way to cut this flame, to stop this flame. It's water for the flame in this situation. And of course, I think we need to rebuild the leadership and way of thinking in Ukraine. Maybe this this lecture, this lesson from the lessons of this war will show us again that Ukraine is a country which, do the Kissinger's works, situated between the West and East, and we can become a bridge, but not the front line between the West and East. We need, of course, the membership of European Union because it's a good economical level, it's a good law level, and so on. But Ukraine, I think, should postpone or even decline any membership of military blocs for the all our future. We need to find this balance. We need to stop this war in our lands, and we need to be patient to wait for a new changes in Russia when maybe it will be possible to start a new negotiation about our lands, peaceful negotiation with the new Russian government.
Shifted from the military operation into a political discussion.
Political discussion and diplomatical dialogue.
Right. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
Выключать как-то, что-то делать?
Я зараз